The claws make for one of the best weapon classes in the entire game. There are only 5 of them in total, but probably 4 of them are a solid S tier. But yeah, that is amazing for so many different reasons. One, they get some of the highest DPS in the game, probably only just behind things like power stance curve swords. But being that these are paired types of weapons, you only have to upgrade the one just to gain the power stancing moveset, because all you have to do is just two-hand. And with a paired weapon, you actually get things like running heavy attacks and jumping heavy attacks too that hit with both weapons simultaneously. They also do get access to both slashing damage and piercing damage. They will end up getting a passive status effect, most of which being bleed. They're also incredibly light and just for the most part just very easy to use. And on top of all of that, most of these claws also offer you 110 crit. So for every single one of these critical attacks, you're just going to get bonus damage with the claws. And the fact that all the infusible based claws actually have a status effect that can scale with arcane means that it has amazing synergy with these arcane builds too. Like the only downsides that I could say about claws is that obviously they don't really have the most amount of range. And they don't really get many weapon skill options either. Like the best damaging option they might have would be things like Impaling Thrust. And Impaling Thrust on a claw is still not going to be that amazing. I kind of wish they had their own different type of unique skill. But for the most part, it doesn't even matter because as I mentioned, they get some of the highest DPS with just R1 spamming. So you're probably going to want to build around them using just different types of weapon buffs. Things like Cragblade, Shriek of Sorrow. They could do pretty fine. But you could also go with things like Blood Flame Blade and pair it with like a different type of skill, and it'll still offer you some nice utility. But yes, as I did mention, there are only 5 claws, so it's not going to take too much effort to talk about all of these things, and it's not going to be too long of a video. But just know that this weapon class is just amazing. Starting off at the bottom, the HOOKCLAWS, which is not a bad weapon by any means, hence it still being at least in the A tier. It is actually the earliest claw that you can acquire, and out of all the dexterity bleed-based claws, this one actually does perform the highest in terms of damage. But funnily enough, even like the BLOODHOUND claws, which is mainly like a strength-based claw with a dexterity build, still actually out-damages it. And that weapon also gets the exact same moveset and doesn't really weigh much more. But the HOOKCLAWS are going to have the use of being acquired right at the beginning of the game at Stormveil Castle, and you can just carry from start to finish very easily. Whether you go all into dexterity or go into arcane with an occult infusion, it's going to perform perfectly fine. But yeah, the reason why it's not going to get into the S tier is because all the other claws are probably just going to outclass it, either in terms of damage or moveset or just having something else more unique. And also all the other base game claws, or the ones that can be infused, can be acquired relatively early as well. So it's not that unique, but it's still an amazing weapon. At number 4, the Claws of Night, which yes, the S tier literally starts from now, and I do consider 3 other claws better than this one, but if someone were to put this one at number 1, I wouldn't really argue with it much. But the reason why I'm still going to put it at number 4 is because it is the lowest damaging of all the other claws, because it cannot be infused and does get split magic damage, does only get a dexterity scaling as well, so therefore there is no way to really improve the bleed build-up, and at higher levels you are going to notice that it's not going to perform anywhere near as good as the other claws in terms of damage. And the fact that it does get that projectile heavy attack that does like less than half the amount of damage compared to all the other claws doesn't really help it either. But with claws, you're just going to be R1 spamming anyway, and this weapon is the only claw that cannot be infused, and actually gets a really good unique skill and scattershot throw. That isn't really entirely unique, as you can put this one onto the throwing daggers, but this skill on the claws is just much better as it does much more damage, and it can also do bleed buildup. Now the skill itself actually does go relatively far, does damage in a nice AoE, and can proc bleed quickly for only like 10 FP. Now the downside of the skill is that it does have pretty severe damage fall off. At these further distances, it definitely doesn't really do the most amount of damage, but at closer ranges, it definitely can shred enemies. But at these closer ranges, you're probably better off just using the light attack combos, as they can just result in higher DPS due to them working with things like the multi-hit talismans, and they could probably proc bleed faster too. But the benefits of this skill is going to be that it can hit multiple enemies at once, and the bleed buildup actually doesn't have any damage fall off. Even at these further distances, it basically does just as much bleed buildup, and any single time that enemies just walk a bit further away from you, you can just quickly use the skill or spam it over and over again, and just probably proc bleed until they walk back towards you. So there are so many different situations where the Claws of Night can be like an amazing and borderline broken option, but I still think some of the other claws are better because of things like build synergy and its overall DPS. At number 3, the Bloodhound Claws, which this weapon is like one of the highest DPS weapons in the entire game. Out of all the bleed-based claws, this one can just get the highest amount of damage with basically every single infusion. It doesn't get as much damage as the Venomous FANG, but that one is a poison-based weapon, and bleed is obviously going to be the better status effect, so against enemies that can be bled out, the DPS of this weapon can just be ridiculously high. You can just keep R1 spamming for days, and everything is going to get destroyed very quickly. So if somebody were to put this one at number 1, that would be perfectly valid in my book. Now the only reason why I'm still going to put it at number number 3 is because I think the Raptor Talons is still going to be the better bleed option despite it getting less damage, as I will get into. And yes, it is mainly to do with things like the moveset, but if you didn't really care much about having like a unique heavy attack or whatnot, and you purely just wanted to R1 spam for maximum DPS, then the Bloodhound Claws is probably just going to be for you. It does also have the benefit of doing bonus damage around shields, which is not really that useful in PvE, but it still is a nice bonus. At number 2, the Venomous Fang, which is one of my favorite weapons in the entire game. It definitely is the best poison weapon by far, and it definitely makes for one of the best claws as well, as it does result in the highest amount of damage. And basically every infusion, this one just out damages the rest. Now, still not might result in the highest amount of DPS because this is doing poison, and the other ones are going to be doing bleed buildup, and bleed buildup is just going to be the better status effect. But this actually does get deadly poison, which is still an amazing effect to have, as there are plenty of different buffs that you do have to just boost the damage. And with a high arcane build with an occult infusion, this weapon can get like over 150 poison buildup, and you can proc poison in like a couple of hits, and you just instantly gain the effect of those buffs, stack the multi-hit talismans, and you're just doing stupid amounts of damage. And as of the DLC, we do have the existence of the Poison Flower Blooms twice Asher War, and this weapon is probably like the best pairing alongside this skill. It still not might end up being better than like a Cragblade R1 spamming type of build in terms of DPS, but it does have some nice utility in terms of just doing good damage in just one hit. But even outside of an arcane build, this weapon also performs good with a bleed infusion, because you're going to have 2 different status effects that all scale of arcane. So if you're at these really high levels and have like a bunch of points put into strength, dexterity, and arcane, you're going to be getting so much damage and so much status effect build up that is going to be ridiculous in terms of DPS. And also, if you do pair this alongside a poison-based infusion, you still actually gain the effects of deadly poison, but it actually lasts just as long as regular poison. So if you are doing these like level 1 runs, it might be pretty useful there, but for the most part, I wouldn't really bother with this because having deadly poison only lasts 30 seconds is probably more of a positive, because you can actually keep the up times of your buffs such as the Kindred Rot Exaltation, Mushroom Crown, and Poisoned Hand. Because those things only last like 20 to 30 seconds, it's just going to be better synergy to just not have it poison infused. Now, the only reasons why I still wouldn't put it at number 1 is because I do think that having passive bleed is just the better status effect, and also this claw is the shortest of the claws, and also it only gets 100 crit multiplier, where all the other infusible claws get at least 110, which doesn't really matter that much as you're not really going to be stance breaking that quickly with a claw anyway, but it still is going to be a downside. But yes, this is a weapon that you can acquire pretty early on in the game. It's going to have extremely low requirements, offer you deadly poison and the ability to be infused, and it's going to be a claw. So this is like a definitive S tier option. At number 1, the Raptor Talons, which actually is the lowest damaging claw out of all the infusible based claws. With every single infusion, it just gets at the bottom. But there are going to be a bunch of reasons why I do put this at number 1. And for one of the reasons is that it does get the best heavy attack, as the uncharged heavy attack does actually hit with both weapons at once, which just results in higher damage, where like the regular uncharged heavy attacks the claws have only hit once. And when you do have it fully charged, it's basically just as long as an animation as all the other charged heavy attacks, but it just like lunges way further. And being able to like lunge into an enemy at a standstill position is like incredibly underrated. And also this weapon does get bonus damage with jumping attacks. Now the thing is, the motion values are still not that much higher, and combined with the fact that this thing actually does have lower amounts of AR, it's not going to result in the highest damage with the jumping attack. Like even things like the Bloodhound claws can still just get more damage with the jumping attack. But another benefit that it does have is that it is the lightest of all the claws. So if you actually wanted to pair this alongside like a Blue Dancer's Charm type of build, which actually is very popular nowadays due to things like the Rock Heart Talisman and those Dragon Communion builds with Dragon Maw, and if you're actually going with an arcane build, the Raptor Talons is basically right there to pair alongside with an occult infusion, get high amounts of bleed buildup, and its benefit of amazing damage. So in my opinion, I think the Raptor Talons just has the most amount of uses, and that's probably the main reason why it actually does get at number 1. But if you only really cared about R1 spamming and just wanted to have like the maximum DPS, then like the Bloodhound claws is going to be the best option. But either way, you can't really go wrong with any of these claws because they're just all amazing. Okay, that is the video now done and complete. As always, let me know what your opinions are down in the comments below. The next video is going to be ranking all the fist weapons, which there are roughly about 14 in total, and like half of them kind of suck. So it might make for a pretty interesting video, so definitely do subscribe for that one. But yeah, catch you guys around. Bye.